Hi, everybody, and welcome to this pre-recorded training session on Orals 101, an introduction and best practices to orals presentations in government contracting. As we get into things, we are going to start with some context because that's very important. And for presentations, one of the most important pieces of context is who is this speaking? My name is Lisa Shaymont. I am the co-founder of the Pulse of GovCon. I am a public speaker, perhaps known as an industry pundit, 12 plus years in proposal development. And as you can see by this future of work seminar picture, I am incredibly serious. And here is the snippet of a laundry list of speaking engagements that I have participated in. In real life, I am much more footloose and fancy-free, a lot less serious, and a lot more fun, I think, and vulnerable. And so I'm bringing this to your attention because the first tip for any presentations, including orals presentations, is you must introduce yourself before you start speaking. And it doesn't always have to be a list of your credentials. Often it's just your name that's enough. But I do believe that in any presentation, it's important to be authentic so that you're able to capture people's attention and so that through communication metrics, you're able to leave an impact and an imprint on them. So they remember not only what you said, but who you are. I do believe the most effective presenters are those that are vulnerable versus being robotic. And I do think that you can be really knowledgeable without being a textbook. I am very much a proponent of plain language and plain speak. And if you're not trying to put on airs and sound fancy and that more people can understand the messages that you are trying to convey, even if they're really high level, in-depth concepts, then I believe that people are going to be more receptive to you as a presenter. So now we are going to be discussing orals presentations. Our table of contents is as follows. Number one, what is an orals presentation? What does it mean? Why do we do it? Number two, presentation best practices. And number three, Q&A best practices. So let's start with some definition. What is an orals presentation? An orals presentation is a component of the contract acquisition lifecycle. If you've ever submitted a federal proposal against a solicitation, sometimes there is a component of that in perhaps a different phase that will require an orals presentation as part of the government's evaluation of your company before contract award. Now, orals presentations can come in many different formats, and they all have different elements that need to be incorporated, different rules, and different levels of preparation before you begin. Some different formats include prepared slides plus a proposal. This would be you have a proposal, you submit the document, and then you also have slides that you present against. Sometimes it's just prepared slides as a proposal in lieu of that written document. So you're not submitting that proposal, that text, that narrative. Instead, you have the slides that you are able to present to the government. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, unlucky, however you want to put it, you have a problem-solving exercise. This could also be known as a challenge scenario. This is when they give you time to solve an issue, a question, a problem, and then time to present. These are some of my favorites because I think it is so very interesting to be presented with something that you didn't know about in advance, and then to be evaluated based on how you and your team solve the problem in front of you, so that it is just as much presentation as you problem solve as the solution presentation becomes. There's also team Q&A. You can think of it as a panel, and then a PM Q&A. Sometimes they just go right to the program manager or project manager and say, we're just going to ask you some questions. There are a few objectives of government orals presentations, and it's really dependent on the format that you might come across, but really they are to do the following. Evaluating your expertise. It is more difficult to speak about what you know than it is to write about what you know, where you can edit and it can be iterative and you can have other people's input. It tests your group chemistry. If you are being proposed as part of a team, it showcases how you interact with the rest of your teammates. It can gauge who wrote your proposal response. We live in a wild world of proposal consulting where maybe organizations aren't even writing their proposals. So sometimes it's kind of a safety measure to say, okay, do you guys actually know what it is that you said in this proposal response that you submitted? It can be to measure leadership ability. And we're going to be talking about this a lot in the context of the PMs. It is also meant to stress you out. This is meant to put you in a pressure cooker environment, because if you're able to keep your cool, if you're able to be collected and responsive to these requirements, then it's an easy sort of, not even a stretch, it's an easy jump to saying that, yes, if we have high pressure environments within the contract work, that you will be able to handle it. Or if there's a problem, then you will be able to solution it, that you have leadership in place to be able to delegate amongst a team as well. And at the end of the day, this is really it. If you take away anything, orals presentations are to determine if the government wants you as coworkers, if they want to be calling you to answer questions, if they want you to be walking the halls with them. It is just as much about competency as it is about approachability and about somebody liking you. And this is not a popularity contest, but it sure doesn't hurt if you are well liked by the customers. So now, how do you convey that? How do you become well liked through a presentation? And how do you make sure you get the point across and that you're sounding educated and like you know what you're talking about, and you're also making sure that you're putting your best foot forward in the way that you present? Well, we have some best practices here that we're going to go through. I like to start with a note on nerves. I like to say, if you're not at least a little nervous before you present, then you're probably doing something wrong. I think if you're not nervous, then you might be a touch arrogant. And look, we do presentations all the time. I'm not saying that you have to have a tummy ache every time you get up in front of people, but if you don't think about the impact of the words that you're saying and you're not able to really situate yourself in that, then you might be a little too cocky for this and might want to humble yourself a bit. I like to point to Game of Thrones that arrogance might get you poisoned. So it is just better to approach these things with a little humility and knowing that nerves are completely fine. Now, there are some common presentation mistakes that I see in my work all the time. I don't need to practice. I don't need to practice for that orals presentation, Lisa. That's ridiculous. Oh, you're killing me. Blasé attitude or zero energy, people that are monotone and just come out and say the content. No presentation objectives. That's another presentation mistake. If I can't listen to what you're saying and understand why I should care about it, then that makes it so that I'm way less likely to walk away wanting to know more or wanting to learn more or wanting to work with you. People being stationary, frozen, scared. I said that nerves are okay, but we also don't want to let them show. No eye contact or too much eye contact. And this is funny because we are in a world where virtual orals presentations are happening more and more each day. And so this idea of eye contact becomes very difficult on a screen. As you can see with me here too, I'm not going to stare in the camera when I am referencing other people on the screen or the material that I am looking at. But just be mindful of your eye contact, especially when you're in person. Speaking too fast. I am definitely one of the people out there that prefers the Gilmore Girls words per minute speed. And that is very, very fast. I believe that's roughly 180 words per minute. And I think most people try to keep it around 100 words per minute. But when we are presenting, we must slow down. Lack of team cohesion is another mistake. We need to show that not only do we know the other people on the team, but that we've worked with them, that we understand their leadership styles, their communication styles, and we know what their level of expertise is. And then if your leadership is undermined or in doubt, that is a huge red flag in orals presentations. And I see this one a lot, and I'm going to call some people out right now because you're going to say, uh-oh, I've probably done that. When you are doing orals presentations and you have a program manager, often the government will say, your program manager must be one of the presenters, and they might give you flexibility on who else joins. With that flexibility, a lot of organizations will say, well, I'm going to put executive management or executive leadership in here. I'm going to put the small business CEO. That's fine. I believe that that's important. It shows your dedication to the cause. But on that orals presentation, the king and queen is the program manager, is that PM that you have. And the reason that you do that is because if you are putting somebody in charge of a contract or of a project, and then all of a sudden you see executive leadership or management steamrolling that individual, it will put their leadership in doubt for the government. So those are some mistakes. Here are some more: defensiveness or frustration, particularly in a Q&A format. We're going to be talking about this a little bit later. Lack of knowledge about the contract, your company, your team, or your job, really needing to be knowledgeable on what it is that you're presenting, what the objectives of the contract are, what the background is, what your customer needs are, just really understanding. Dishonesty or stretching the facts. There's something about if somebody not lies, but is a little hyperbolic to your face, it can be very off-putting. And then disparity between your written proposal and your verbal content. A lot of times they'll say, if you say something that wasn't written, they're going to err on the side of what was submitted via writing. So we do in the government contracting space, agencies will do recordings of especially virtual presentations now are much easier, but they would still do recordings in person too as sort of an audit, but they're not using the words typically to evaluate if you have slides that you've presented. Again, it's very dependent on the type of orals presentation. I've seen it go both ways, but either way, if you have a proposal that you've submitted and then you start speaking in your orals presentation, making sure that there's no disparity between that content. Poor grooming and inappropriate dress. I do not believe that we need to be suit and tie every single day, but let's be cleanly. Disrespect to agency, customer, coworkers. You'd be surprised, and that goes to the last bullet too, of interrupting or contradicting each other on the team. We are trying to be polite, cohesive, no matter what the underlying issues may be between a team. That's not something that we're going to show in an orals presentation. Now, there are some bad words to use in a presentation. They include likely, will, probably, could, maybe, think so, I believe, need to, I feel, kind of, sort of, try to, want to, should be, and no. These are sort of negative words that can undermine your credibility and make the presenter believe that you don't believe what you're saying and the presentation. Lisa, why should any of this matter? I am a subject matter expert. I know everything that there is to know about the content that I am presenting on. It's because orals presentations are theater. This is about putting on a show. This is about selling yourself. There is when you start thinking of orals presentations as being theater, you are going to start recognizing the things that you need to do in order to stand out. An example, challenge scenarios. People will do full coaching for weeks or months on challenge scenarios that the government puts out. And this is because you need to map the moves of how you problem solve for an issue, because you are being evaluated on how you solve problems just as much as the answer to that problem. So for that, you would have assigned roles. Okay, I know no matter what the content, that Julie is going to be the one that says, all right, guys, let's think about the tool set that we have that we can use. I know that no matter what, Gary's going to be the one that says, well, you know, this really ties in with one of our past performance references. It's that level of theater that's going to make you so much better prepared for these types of presentations. Now, I like to do a little note on humor the same way that I did with a note on arrogance, and that is humor is dangerous. It should only be used by professionals. I said, lest ye be booed, because you might, not all jokes land. And so I would just be wary of that unless you do this often, unless you try the joke thing and you know that you're really funny. It's probably best to leave the jokes out of it. And especially when it comes to these types of presentation, like self-deprecating humor, I don't want to see it. I want it out the door, not appropriate for this forum. That being said, there is nothing wrong with a little poetry. I love poetic language in presentations, using things like similes and metaphors and other comparative language in order to make a point. That's one of the ways that we can help people understand high-level concepts that maybe they're not sneezing. Maybe you don't know what this means, but I can compare it to going to a grocery store, something that's ubiquitous that we've all gone through. And that kind of language is very, very helpful in education and showing that you understand something at its core. So now these are some real presentation mechanisms that you can use. If you have a team who is presenting, you should always have a graceful transition to the next speaker. Think about this like a transition statement in a piece of writing. You don't just make point, 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 point. That's bullets. You have to have some sort of connective tissue between the two thoughts. And often it's the same thing when it comes to between two speakers. And it is good to try to stretch out a bunch of different speakers within a presentation so that you're not just overexposed on one person. So now when it's time to end your part and pass it on to the next speaker, we can use something called name dropping. And so we have that. But really this idea of a golden thread is that there should be some sort of connective tissue that binds everything that you're saying. And now moving into the next slide, something that connects is directing the presentation. This is something that you might do very naturally, but you'll see how helpful it can be when you are presenting. This is pointing forward. This is still to come, and pointing backwards. This came before. You might have noticed that I've already done some forward pointing and directing the presentation here today with you. Oh, we are going to be discussing that later in the presentation. Perfect. Or, hey, if you noticed, a couple minutes ago, Jamie said X, Y, and Z. Now we're pointing backwards. We're really making sure that we're directing the presentation. Name dropping was something that in the previous slide I had referenced. Use each other's names. This is so crucial. And it is such a funny thing because it seems so painfully obvious. But you need to know who is saying what and when, and also how to pronounce their names, especially if this is a new team. So ask right up front, what is the proper pronunciation of your name? And then really pointing to each other too. It's not I stop and then somebody picks it up. I stop and say, and now Amber will be talking about capture management. Amber goes, thank you, Lisa. And then she talks about capture management. That little moment of I know somebody's name, I am pointing to her, telling you what is forward still to come in a presentation. She points backwards to me saying, thank you for my contribution to the presentation. Small, but powerful. And you'll start to notice when people don't do this. Now, in a similar vein, I mentioned overexposure of presenters. This is a bad example. I am hugely overexposed in this presentation because I'm by my lonesome. I have nobody else. But if I were on a team, I would always try to plan in cameo appearances to avoid overexposure. So by this, I mean, I might be talking about a subject. I might be saying, capture management is X, Y, and Z, or proposal management. Hey, Amber, I know that you have experience with this component that I'm talking about. I am now going to reference an anecdote you might be able to share. She goes, thanks, Lisa. I do have this anecdote. Here it is. Back to you. Thanks, Amber. That really exemplifies the point that I was trying to make. Do you see what we're doing here? We're pulling other people into the presentation. This can be planned or this can be organic. I try to make everything as planned as possible. Now, the issue with presenting with more than one person is you have a lot of different personalities and maybe subject matter expertise. Now, something that I'm going to tell you here today, something that I tell all of my orals coaching students is never, ever correct anybody. Never will actually somebody on your team. We don't like it. You know how we were talking about putting leadership in questions or being undermined or stepping on each other's toes or interrupting? We don't like that. The optics are bad. So if somebody on your team has said something that is incorrect, you may elaborate on it. So if that's the magic word, elaborate. So if Amber said something and I go, oh my gosh, Amber, I don't know what that was. I'll go, Amber, I'd like to elaborate on that point that you made. And then I'll say the truth or the piece or whatever it is. Now nobody's the wiser because I haven't corrected Amber, my business partner, in public. That's just nasty. And nobody's going to remember the fact that I said elaborate. It's just going to feel gentle. Even if I elaborate on something and it's the exact opposite of what was said, in these sort of presentations, you only really take away a fraction of the words that are being said, and you're much more, I guess, adept at taking away what you felt and not to be a hippy-dippy, but the vibe of things going on. So never ever correct, just elaborate. Visual cues are very important. And so this applies to in-person and virtual presentations. You should make eye contact and not just with one person. So if I was in person, I would scan the room. I would look left to right. Now, this is difficult in a virtual environment. I can look up and down the margin on Zoom. I can see that I'm not just staring blankly and intently at one place. Move your eyes, very important. Smiling is important. I have told some people that were under our Orals coaching tutelage that they had to smile more. They didn't love that, but it's worth stating. It doesn't mean, and this is something I've also said, and then I got a very different response where this lovely gentleman just smiled ear to ear the whole time. And I said, okay, even when he wasn't speaking, you don't need to do that. It was very endearing, but we want to be natural. And so that's not natural. Showing engagement, nod when other people are speaking. Go. Nonverbal communication skills are so important. And if you have solid nonverbal communication skills or not. I was at a JMU College of Arts and Letters career day, and I was speaking to students. And they said, well, what's one thing that you want us to take away from this? And I said, fix your face, because you look like a bunch of dead fish out there. And so you need to be engaged. You need to nod. You need to show that you're listening and that you're engaged in what is being said. Stop rocking. This is more like if you're standing in person and you kind of just like move back and forth and it looks like you're going to get seasick. But either way, making sure that you are keeping yourself together. I don't want to be spinning around in my chair in this virtual environment either. So even when you are not speaking, there are some rules of conduct, and that is you are in role. You are paying attention to the person that's speaking. You are alert at all times. You are exhibiting good posture even while you are seated, and you're not whispering or interacting with your colleagues. No sidebars, nothing here. And this is people are so much more, I guess, ready to do this in a virtual environment because it feels like when you're not in person that nobody can see you, even when you're on camera. So for this especially, making sure that you're not emailing. We're going to be talking about virtual considerations and logistics, but you're not emailing, you're not eating a sandwich, making sure that you are engaged and you are in your role the entire time. I love the use of diagrams when you can do it. If you're in person and you have the ability to draw something out, obviously this is something that's banked, right? We're not artists. So if this is like flow diagrams, other illustrations that you can quickly sort of turn out to show visually, maybe components of a process or of a contract, or some sort of map or org chart or something that you can put together. Definitely use them. If you can prep your slides in advance, anything that you can do in advance that you can quickly pull into so we have this visual element is always very helpful. I love enumerating. Count to make a point. And by this, I mean when you especially are in a big speaking component and maybe you have a couple of slides or you have a bunch of points that you're trying to make. If you at the front say, during this section of the presentation, I am going to be discussing 4 key takeaways. Takeaway 1, takeaway 2, takeaway 3, takeaway 4. Starting with takeaway 1, and then you describe it. Next, going into takeaway 2, and then you describe it. It's just this way of enumeration really can help your listener follow what it is that you're saying. So I love counting in presentations, but my favorite mechanism that I use when it comes to presenting is rhetorical questions. What's a rhetorical question, you might ask? Essentially what I just did. A rhetorical question is a question that doesn't necessarily need to be answered, but in the context of presentations, we do like to answer them. But it's something that can draw the audience in. It gives you some time if you get lost. And this is a great tactic. If you are talking, and you don't even know why you're talking anymore, if you say, and why does this matter? That reinforces the so what factor. And it makes you stop. It helps organize your thoughts, and it's powerful if answered. So if you say, now, why does any of this matter? It matters because then for your listener, they know the audio cue of, hey, this is the importance, this is the benefit. And so again, I love a question. And why does this matter is not the only one. It can be, what is this, you might ask, or where have we done this before? Well, I'll tell you. It's something that sets it up. It's like when you set a volleyball before it is spiked. That's the rhetorical question. This is just a piece of best practice, and that's know your win themes and your selling points. Don't forget about them when it comes to the orals presentation. They should be woven into your response, and you should send a consistent message across everyone on your team. In that vein, having a bumper sticker can also be really important. And this can be sort of a tangible bumper sticker or an intangible. It's what you personally stand for. It's what the slide personally stands for. It's the takeaway. It's the promise. It's the commitment. It can be any of these things, but it's just something that you can hang your hat on at the end of a slide, where it's, this is what I have presented on, and this is what I want you to take away from it. Sometimes what you want them to take away from it is the benefit. Sometimes it's the experience. Sometimes it's the component of the SOW that it references. Again, it can be so many different things, but think about having a bumper sticker on those orals presentation slides. Now, again, I mentioned we are right now in 2023. And the world has changed in a big way when it came to orals presentations. Before, it was you had people camped out trying to find out what the room was going to look like that you were going to present in, what the configuration was, how large it was. Is there a whiteboard? So how much room do we have to move around in order to present? Do we have ways that we can, put slides together? Things like that. Are there windows? So many different things. It's not the same as it was when it's in a virtual environment, and actually in-person environments, I feel like have become a lot less strict, but that's neither here nor there. But virtually, we're able to do these presentations in the comfort of our own home, but we still need to give it the same level of intensity as if we were in person. And so things that you can do just as a baseline for virtual logistics include having appropriate lighting. You want to make sure that you're not too deeply backlit, that you typically want to have a light in front of you. I don't have a ring light on right now. I'm sorry. It's a weird time of day. I would have closed my blinds, but I didn't. But definitely making sure that you're lit up enough to see you. I've been in some Zoom meetings where somebody looked like they were an anonymous tipster because they were just completely in shadow. Now, virtual logistics is also important when it comes to practice and then the actual presentation. Always perform the presentation in the same place, on the same network, and with the same equipment as game day. Leave nothing to chance. This should not be something that people do where, they bring their laptop, they're in their kitchen one day presenting it, or they're working on this, or they're at the beach, but they're going to really be doing it back at their house, or they're going to do it at the office, but now they don't know the Wi-Fi, or the Ethernet's not working, or it's a slow connection, or it's this, that, we don't understand the lighting. Always make sure if you're going to practice these things that you're doing it where you're going to perform. Also, test your microphone. It is 2023. There is no excuse for having crappy audio anymore. I'm sorry, pet peeve to the nth degree. Buy a microphone, people. Get an external one. You don't have to have this podcast level mic. I know it's excessive. It looks ridiculous, but definitely don't just rely on the microphone within your laptop because they can be really bad audio. Get something that connects to a USB. There's a lot of options. If we can't hear you, then we don't know what you're saying, period, point blank. Now, framing yourself within the screen is also important and facing the direction of the camera. Again, you'd be surprised how many presentations I see at the profile of the face versus head on. And it's because we have multiple screens. And so, even now I know I'm more at an angle because of the way that my Zoom is configured, but making sure that you are able to be straight on and not looking all over the room. And then deciding on collaborative backgrounds and naming conventions. So like right now, my Zoom says my name is Lisa Shea Munt. It might be Lisa Shea Munt, co-founder of the Pulse of GovCon. It might be whatever, Lisa Munt, program manager, whatever it is, so that people can understand easily and recognize who you are and what your role is on a project just by looking. Okay. Now, finally, we're going to be getting into question and answers, which is sometimes a component of Oral's presentation. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's in lieu of, but either way, there are some best practices in terms of answering questions. Listen. To be a good speaker, you must be a good listener. You have to listen carefully to the questions to ensure that you understand. And so by that, I mean, resist temptation to interrupt an answer. You might think you know where a question is going, but that's a dangerous game. So don't jump the gun. This isn't Family Feud, right? Let Steve Harvey say the entire piece and then hit the buzzer and say what you're going to say. If you're seated with a pen and paper, you can take notes on the question. You can do that virtually too. You can read the question back if it's a really high stakes one. And please be wary of compound questions. If there's multi-part questions, be sure that you answer every segment. Now there's a couple different approaches, but my preference is a quarterback approach to Q&A. If it's more than just the PM Q&A, if it's more of a panel. I believe that the PM, and yes, it should be the PM, should take all questions and then farm them out to teammates as appropriate. So it might be directed to the entire team, but this is the PM says like, I'm so happy you asked that question. Cindy over here is going to be the exact person to answer it for you. Maybe you give a little bit too of framing or reference before you pass it on to your team, but it gives the responsibility to the PM and also requires them to know their team's expertise, and it exemplifies their leadership in recognizing where their team's strengths are and what their strengths are too. So that's my personal preference. There is the volunteer method where everyone's sort of quiet and then you say, I can take this one, especially if your teammates have blank stares and nobody wants to volunteer. But in the same vein of volunteering, be careful with elaboration, because remember, we don't correct. There is a tendency for people, if a teammate answers the question, that you might want to add your words because we like the words better that we want to say. But if our teammate has answered it sufficiently, then leave it alone. And that can be very difficult. And that's one of the issues with volunteering too, is you have too many people volunteer and then you actually diminish the authority of the people that have been answering the questions. Now, we'd like to show appreciation and respect across everything, but don't use the phrase, great question, because that could be condescending. I know is a good question. That's why I asked it. It can insult others in the room. What's wrong with my question? So you can answer with things like, I'm glad you asked that question. You raise an interesting point. Thank you for asking. I hope someone would ask that. Your question gives me a chance to clarify, add X, Y, and Z. Or yeah, let's talk about that. There's sort of other phrases that we can use to jumpstart the answer to a question. And if you don't know something, look, I am all about saying, I don't actually know. And I think that that's fine, except for in the context of Oral's presentation Q&A. Because again, we take away maybe 25% of the words that are said, and it's more about the feelings and the optics that we get. So if you say, I don't know, then all of a sudden that's triggering to me, right? So if you don't know something, say what you do know, and then pass the question to somebody else. You can be vague enough, or you can provide, an anecdote, or say like something that's somewhat relevant is X, Y, and Z. At least you've said something, and then hopefully the answer gets more, appropriately answered through one of your teammates. Now, remember, at the end of the day, an orals presentation is about showcasing your competency and your approachability. I want you to treat it like a job interview and show the government that you fit the role, whether that's the PM, whether that's the executive leadership that is going to be at the company that acquires the contract, whether that's the quality control specialist that's on there, or the HR person, or the recruiter, or the technical expert, anybody that's going to contribute. That's what they're really doing. They are interviewing you for this job. So I want you to treat it as such. And also remember that oral presentations, as well as any presentations, are theater. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can practice and be coached through it. So if you ever have an orals presentation need that is coming up and you want coaching, please reach out to us at the Pulse of GovCon, pundits at thepulsegovcon.com, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.